Before I begin, I'd like to offer this dedication. This year should be a blessing and a merit for the health and success of the families of Regina Bas Yosef Ruvain and Yeshaya ben Yisrael, Benjamin Wolf ben Tzvi Hirsch, and Baruch ben Benjamin Wolf. And the neshamas should have tremendous schus for this year. Okay. Tonight, since I'm in this topic of the basically the last battle of the Messianic process, which, I've tried to bring a proof, and I think the proof in many ways is very convincing. And we are in the midst, obviously, I say, of a war between Israel and Persia, which of course is Iran, and the proxies of Iran, because they obviously don't want to get involved in the direct confrontation with Israel. Look, they're not stupid people. Persians are bright. They realize Israel has many atomic bombs, or I should say, many hydrogen bombs. You don't get involved in a war with a country that has that kind of weapons, obviously. And as I've indicated last week, because the Medrash says, Higia zman geulaschem, the time of your redemption has arrived, then obviously it means that war is basically the last war. Now that has many repercussions, as I will discuss tonight, what that means and so on. I believe it means that there is an appearance of Gog from the land of Magog. I believe that in that type of a last war, then there is Gog. And I will discuss who I think Gog is, which I imagine a lot of people may find quite shocking. But in any case, so we have that repercussion and many, many different ideas. Now, one of the things I mentioned last week is that why do we see America collapsing in many ways, especially Los Angeles, and we have New York, Chicago. There are at least 20 cities that are really in many ways collapsing. The beauty of these cities and the sophistication of these cities is unbelievable destruction when you take a look at that. The question is, what does that mean? So that's one of the things that I want to talk about and so on. First thing, you have to know certain ideas, which I think I've mentioned before, but I want to be more clear in terms of what they are. There is a concept called Tiferes and Oiz. In fact, we say that in the morning Shachris, the brachas. Oiz Yisrael b'gvura, who girds Israel with strength. You see, and we also refer to the whole concept of Tiferes, right? Also in the brachas of Shachris. What does that mean? What is Tiferes and Oiz? Well, the Shechina, the divine presence, has many attributes, has many properties, characteristics, and so on. Of course, one of the greatest, I'm not going to go into obviously who is God, but among these attributes, two of them stand out. If you want to know the magnificence of God, there's two attributes that stand out. I mean, there are obviously many attributes that God has, which are absolutely astonishing. But I think in the human terms, there are two that stand out, I think, the most. One is Tiferes, beauty. Beauty does not mean, the poetry and so on, a great looking painting. No. Beauty means chokhmah, wisdom, knowledge, in an incredibly crystal clear way. It's knowing reality, you see. And therefore God has that attribute of Tiferes, that beauty. God knows everything. I mean, we don't even realize what that means. But he knows everything down to its lowest depth, or I should say it's, you can look at it, the highest depth and so on. In other words, God knows everything totally. There's nothing that he doesn't know, which is astounding. We can't even begin to imagine what kind of database that is. Yet God knows everything. That's what Tiferes is. So that's the first thing we admire about God, that he knows everything. What does it mean to know everything? He is completely in contact with all reality. Whatever there is, whatever exists, he knows. He's intimately, infinitely connected to reality, where nothing is concealed. We have absolutely no understanding of how being can do that. I once gave a shiur, Who is God?, where I explain what that really means, but so on. But right now, that's the idea. Second attribute of God, which is also phenomenal, is what's called the might of God. His ability to do whatever he wants to do. His capacity of action, or, right, his potency. God is completely potent. He's a kol yochel. He could do whatever he wants. And could you imagine that, he has the power, that the only thing he can't do is because he doesn't want to do it, not because he can't do it. And we cannot even imagine what that means and what that is. You see, the ability of God to do anything he wills, you see, is beyond imagination. And if you want to know, well, what can he do? Well, guess what? It's beyond, like I say, beyond imagination. One of our problems is that we live in an unbelievably complex world. We don't realize how complex the human mind is. If you think about these things, or how complex an animal is, or a bug, or a leaf of a plant, the chemical reactions that go on in a leaf when it makes, derives energy from the sun is unbelievable. What chlorophyll is and so on, And one of the problems is that we take all this for granted. Because not only we see it all day long to us, like what's the big deal? But we don't really realize the enormous complexity of what we're looking at. Yet God is able to bring all of this into being, you see. But anyway, those are the two concepts, Tiferes and Oiz. Tiferes is chokhmah, is knowledge, and Oiz is might, the ability to do. Well, what's interesting about that, and these are the two attributes of the Shekhinah, which are magnificent, just beyond description. What is interesting is that the Jews have it, right? Since what really is the secret of the Jew? You see, and that secret is really what is a medrash, right? That says Kudsha Baruch Hu, God, Kodesh Baruch Hu, right? Ushchinte, and the divine presence, which is how God manifests himself to mankind, right? Torah and Torah is Chadhu, is one. Now we don't really, it's really what that means. But the concept that Chadhu is one means on a level we do not understand. We are a mystical embodiment or personification of the Torah itself. In other words, if there's such a thing, which there is, if you want to take the Torah, which is the divine will of God, and turn it into a being, a living being, what would it look like? Now, whatever that means, right? You take the Torah, right, and you turn it into a being that reflects or is identical, or I should say, is the parallel of that Torah. What would it look like? And the answer is the neshama. That's really what the neshama is. That's what it means, chadhu. We are an identicality with God. Well, if that's the case, if God is Tiferes and Oiz, right, beauty and might, right, then we who are a personification of the Torah and of God, Chadu is one, then we have Tveres Anois. Right. That's what we have, which is interesting. That is the natural attributes of the Jew. Because we are, and the Torah, we are in equality. Now, what is interesting is that tells us or allows us to understand certain things. One of the things that the question is, was this ever manifest? This Tveres Anois in a human? I mean, there are people who are very bright, obviously, tremendously and so on, But did we ever see an unbelievable degree above human, right? Abnormal. Abnormally, almost, not infinite, because only God is infinite, right? But completely abnormal. And the answer is yes. One we saw, not that we saw literally, but one that has lived amongst us. Who was the person that had Tveres Anois to a degree which we cannot even believe? You see? And the answer is Shlomo HaMelech. You see, we wonder, when David HaMelech died, so God appeared to Shlomo HaMelech in a dream, and he said, well, I'll give you Chokhmah, or I'll give you wealth. What would you like? And he said, well, I want Chokhmah. So God said, well, that itself was a very wise statement. So I'll give you both. What did God give him? He gave him an unsurpassed Chokhmah. Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, as they say, was not merely the wisest man who ever lived, but his capacity for wisdom and knowledge was beyond comparison. I once heard, what Shlomo HaMelech knew, and so on? I mean, he wrote Koheles, which is incredible wisdom, But how did he know all this? So you have to Shiur, you're talking about Koheles. These are books that have tremendous amount of chokhmah, and they begin to tell us who this man was, and so on. But I once heard, I don't recall where, that Shlomo HaMelech can expound on every tag in the Torah. The tagin, there are several letters in the Torah, Shatnei's gates. Shatnei's is Shin, Tov, Nun, Zayin, and Gimel Zayin, or Gimel Tzadik, and so on, right? They have tagin, or crowns. He could actually expound on these tagin 3,000 halachas on every tag. And it's astounding. We look at the tagin, the crowns on the letters of the Torah, we don't have no idea what they are. We only know from one person that was able to do that was Rabbi Akiva. And Moshe Rabbeinu was jealous that Rabbi Akiva was able to do that. But Rabbi Akiva was not Shlomo HaMelech, you see, even though he was incredible. So Shlomo HaMelech had that wisdom, right? Not only had the wisdom, but that was, if you had a point, well, which era of Jewish history was the greatest sophisticated, successful era of Malchus, of kingship? And the answer is Shlomo HaMelech. All kings wanted to ally themselves with Shlomo HaMelech. There are certain famous kings, and so on, King of Lebanon, and so on, and they were allies of Shlomo. In fact, those wives, we know he had 300 wives and 700 concubines, right? What is this? And the answer is all those wives were really daughters of kings that wanted to ally themselves with Shlomo HaMelech. That's how prestigious he was. So his kingdom was unbelievably sophisticated. Just absolutely incredible, you see. So Shlomo HaMelech was, if you can look at it, the beginning of that type of sophistication. That's who Shlomo HaMelech really was, and so on, And there's a second person that will have that personage of this Tveres Anois in a human being that is extraordinary. Who is that? That is Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. And Mashiach ben Yosef we see, because it says, Parek called Mashiach ben Yosef HaTzadik, who was a forerunner, of course, of Mashiach ben Yosef. he called him the Paneach Rozo. What does that mean? The decoder of secrets, because he was able to interpret the dream of Parai, which is awesome. Now I guarantee you, everybody in Egypt, all the officers, and of Parai, they were all interpreting the dream. Everybody had their interpretation of Pharaoh's dream. So why did Parai believe Yosef? Because Parai not only dreamt the dream, which is the actual code and so on, but he also dreamt its interpretation, except he didn't remember with the interpretation. So what Yosef did is, when he interpreted the dream, he also told him what it means, and then Paro remembered that that's what he dreamt, the interpretation. That's how he knew Yosef was right. So he called him the decoder of secrets, you see? So that's the chokhmah that Yosef had. And Paro was so blown over by the chokhmah of Yosef when he told him, well, how do you solve this problem? And so on. And then what about the ois, the might? Well, when Yosef was in prison, one of the statements that the Torah says is v'chol asher osa, and everything he did, hitzliach Hashem b'yodoi. God made him successful. You see? Which is incredible. The Bansham gave him success in every endeavor that he would attempt in prison. That's ois. That's might. The ability to do and to succeed in what you do. So those are the two people that really have the Tferes HaNois. You see, they were two people that you began to see what that means in a human being. So that's Tferes HaNois. Now, from this we see something very interesting. We know that there is a reciprocal relationship between the Jew, between Yaakov and Esau. And that's a very important idea. Why? Because Esau draws his ability from Yaakov when Yaakov sins. And I mentioned the pasuk last week, right? Ula'oim mila'oim ye'emotz. And one nation, right, will be greater than another nation, which means they will never be equal. How and why? Because it is when the Jew sins, you see, that he gives over his gifts, his enormous potential and so on. But what are his gifts? Tferes HaNois. So it comes out that Esau gets Tferes HaNois. That's where he gets it from Yaakov Avinu, you see? And when Yaakov doesn't sin, when he does the mitzvahs and so on, then he takes it back from Esau, you see. And as a result of that, the Tferes HaNois, the beauty and the might, go back to Yaakov and the Jewish people, right? And they leave Esau, you see. That's one of the reasons why we see that the nations of the world that represent Esau, specifically Rome is really the beginning of the might and the beauty of Esau. The Gemara calls Rome Edom. Esau, the Torah says, is Edom, and Edom is who? Right? Edom becomes Rome, and Rome is Esau. And I mentioned that who's Rome today? Christianity, which is really Western civilization. And the tremendous sophistication of Esau is because the Jews sinned, they went into Golus, and therefore the Tferes HaNois went to Esau. But that's only as long as, right, the Jews give it up to Esau. As long as a Satan takes from the holiness of the Jew, then he can give that holiness to Esau, which becomes Tferes HaNois. But when the Jews himself, right, do righteousness, then they take it back. In fact, that's the real concept of the Golus. The Golus means to be in exile, right, which means we lose the Tferes HaNois. You see, in fact, we say that in a pasuk, in Tachnun, in Shachris, Ad Mosai Uscho Bashvi. How long, we're talking to God, how long will your oaths, your might, right, which I'm saying is the capacity to do anything, Ad Mosai Uscho Bashvi, how long will that be in captivity? which means in the hand of the Satan, to give it over to Esau. V'sif'altcho, and your beauty biyatzo, and your beauty in the hands of the enemy. Right? How long? So that's what we're referring to. We are referring to what? The Tferes and the Ois. Therefore, the sophistication of the West and the Hatzlocha of the West, the tremendous success of the West, right? That deals a terrible blow when they get it to the Jews. Because if they get it, that means we lose it. That's why we lost the Beis HaMikdash. Because now they're getting the Tferes and Ois, Rome and so on, right? And Christianity and Western civilization. Meanwhile, the Jews lose the Beis HaMikdash. They lose prophecy, right? They lose the beauty and the chokhmah of Tferes and Ois, you see. So that's very, very important. I mean, if you want to understand, one of the great tragedies of Tisha B'Av is that not only is the Beis HaMikdash destroyed, that's what we can see, but really, one of the great tragedies of Tisha B'Av is that they have the Tferes and Ois. You see, I'll give you one example. I live in New Jersey, right? And there's a college here not far. It's called Monmouth College. It's in Monmouth County, whatever. It's a nothing college. I hate to say that. It's a nobody college. You ever hear of Monmouth College? You go to that college and it's got a beautiful campus, beautiful buildings. This is a college? Yeah, that's the Tferes and Ois of Judaism, right? And so on. The difference between a yeshiva building, at least it used to be that way, and a college is night and day, you see. And there are any nobody college has a magnificent the buildings and the sophistication of their campus and so on. Now it's beginning to change, where yeshivas begin to resemble more, the Tferes and Ois, because the Tferes and Ois, guess what, is returning to the Jews, you see. Or I'll give you another example. Not now, because now it's a joke. But, it used to be, you go to Manhattan Island. Manhattan was incredible. What a sophisticated civilization Manhattan used to be. You walk down Fifth Avenue. Wow, it's gorgeous. The stores, the enormous amount of, goods for sale, and just the vitality, the vigor, the fashion. I mean, New York is, where is that? Well, New York was the centerpiece of Esau in terms of the Tferes and Ois. And all the incredible, the financial district and so on, all of this stuff was located, the entertainment district in New York City, and really in many ways throughout America, you see. But it's changing, which is very, very interesting. Why? Because we see that the Jews are coming back. We see that the Messianic process is unfolding. And when that happens, then the Tferes and Ois, right, of the Western civilization, right, now begins to collapse or shrivel. And that's what's happening to America and so on, because we are getting back the Tferes and Ois slowly, but it is happening. So I just wanted to make everybody aware of the idea of Tferes and Ois, that it's really a divine gift that we have as a reciprocal relationship with Esau, you see. Okay. So hopefully that gives a much greater, clearer explanation of what is happening. Second idea, which I want to talk about, which is very important, and will undoubtedly be very, very surprising and so on. The major event happening today is not on this planet. The Satan is dying. What does that mean? Well, the Satan accumulates the Kedusha, the holiness of the Jews. That's what he's been doing. When the Jews sin, then they give over the Kedusha, the holiness that they would bring down, right, from the spheres. But the Satan is able to yoinek. Yoinek means to nourish off that holiness, and so on. And that's been going on from all time immemorial. But the problem is that when the Jews go into Gullus or they suffer, then what happens, and certainly when they do the mitzvahs, then they bring down Kedusha. But what's even more interesting is they can take back the Kedusha that they've given the Satan. So it comes out that most of the what's called sparks of holiness that the Jews have lost to the Satan is now being reclaimed by the Jews. Now, without those sparks of holiness, the Satan is going to die, because that's the only way you could survive. So it comes out that the major spiritual event that is happening today is that the Satan is dying. And since he is dying, 98%, maybe by now it's 99%, right, of these sparks are now back in the hands of the Jewish people. And therefore, the Satan realizes that he must get the Jews to sin, or else he's dead. And the only way he can get these sparks of holiness is if a Jew sins, you see. Not only that, but anybody who will assist the Jews, right, is public enemy number one, as they say. Okay, who therefore is public enemy number one? Which one of the nations of the world will assist the Jews? You see? And we begin to see that there's an incredible amount of anti-Semitism. So who is public enemy number one to the Satan that will help the Jews? And when you think about that, the most powerful man in the world really is the President of the United States. Everybody knows that. Trump, as President of the United States, is the greatest enemy of the Satan. Right, even though he's not Jewish. In fact, like I've said many, many times, he's a messianic figure. He's not the Mashiach, of course, not Jewish, but he is a major figure in assisting the Jews to do what? To rid the world of evil. Even though he has a lot of character flaws, but there's no question that the greatest American president in history for the benefit of the Jews is Donald Trump. As such, Donald Trump is the greatest enemy of the Satan. Because if he's going to assist the Jews, right, and he does that by stopping the persecution of the Jews, right, and allowing the Jews to flourish, you see, to get back Jerusalem, to get back the state, to stop the Arabs, to stop the United Nations from destroying the Jews and so on. He wants to bring the Abraham Accords, which is very dangerous, because when there is peace in the world, especially when there's peace in Israel, then Israel will flourish, you see. And part of the exile is when Jews are persecuted. Therefore, Trump, as far as I'm concerned, is the Satan's enemy number one. So the question then is something very important. If that's the case, we now understand that all the incredible, what's called Trump mania, that you're looking at, really is generated by the Satan. He, in some way, convinces people that Trump is unworthy to be the president. Now, the foolishness of people is the fact that they look at Trump's character more important than Trump's policies. And the truth is, Trump, when he was president, was a fabulous president. Everybody was making money. Everybody was doing great. You didn't have any. I mean, you take a look at what's happening. The southern border is chaos. It's destroying America. And then you're talking about, right? You're talking about the energy crisis. You're talking about the crime in the cities. You're talking about the inflation. You're talking that America is a laughing stock of foreign affairs and so on, you know. All of this was nothing when Trump was here. It was incredible. So, okay, you don't like Trump, whatever, the way he tweets and so on, but his policies are wonderful. So how could you decide that you don't want him and you want an absolute moron like Biden to be president instead of Trump? Well, those are satanic temptations and illusions that the Satan is giving the Goyim. So what you really look, Trump mania is satanic, literally, not figuratively. It's really satanic. Because like I said, Trump is enemy number one. Because we are literally at the doorstep or at the threshold of what? We are at the threshold of the Messianic era. So what happened was something which is amazing. What was that? So therefore, what can the Satan hope to do? I once said this a long time ago, but it's worth looking at again, because now it's really very, very significant. If you have a general fighting another country, there's only 3 strategies that he can do, you see. And he's down to 1 week's worth of firepower, which is very bad. So there's only what? There's only 3 strategies he can do to win the war, or else he's finished. One is he will, instead of 7 days worth of firepower, he will do all of it in 1 day. 6 days into 1 day, and he's hoping by calling the bluff, he's going to bluff the other nation that he has all this firepower, and they're going to sue for peace because they say, wait a minute, if this guy has so much firepower left, forget about it, you see. So that's called the great bluff, okay? Now what happens if that doesn't work, right? He puts all his firepower in a concentrated effort, but it fails. Then the second thing that he has to do is to do what? Somehow is to go into the enemy country and break their resolve to do war. To break their resolve. So they will sue for peace. What happens if he tries that and it doesn't work? So he has only one more strategy, and that is to get an ally, that they will give him more weapons and firepower. Well, that's exactly what the Sultan has done. And because he's dying, his first strategy is called the Great Bluff. So what he did was he was able to get World War II. Now, World War II seems to be, right, Hitler, Yamach Shemoy, against the Jews, you see? Or rather, it seems to be Hitler trying to conquer Europe. That's not really what it was about. In the end, Hitler wanted to kill every living Jew. In fact, that was the essence of the war. Hitler, or in a certain way is a Molech, whatever, without getting into that, to destroy the Jewish people. Because he held the Jews to be the reason why mankind are wimps. He held that the Jews have made mankind into wimps, guilt, because of the Jewish religion. He hated the Jews. In fact, there's a book that was called The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, or whatever, written by William Shiur, that says a remarkable thing, that at the end of the war, the generals came over to Hitler, and they said, you know, we're losing the war. So Hitler said, what's the problem? He said, because you're taking all the railroad cards, and you're shipping the Jews to the concentration camps. We need those railroad cards to bring the troops to the front. You are causing us to lose the war. You see? So please, you need to divert all the railroad cards for the war effort, right? Not to kill the Jews. What did Hitler say? He told them to get lost. He's not interested. Shiur writes this. In other words, Hitler was more concerned about the destruction of the Jews than he was about the victory of Germany, which is incredible. People don't realize that. He was a traitor to Germany itself. Why? Because Hitler was obsessed with the destruction of the Jew, and that really is what the essence of the World War II was, to kill all the Jews, and so on, you see? So what the Sultan was able to do is to get all the nations of the world to side with Hitler. How? Doesn't mean that is not to let the Jews in, so they actually conspired with the nations, or they aided and abetted the evil of the nations of the world. You know, England is the one who kept the Jews because of the white paper in 1938, whatever, out of Jerusalem, out of Israel, which is terrible. Franklin Roosevelt didn't allow the Jews in. Terrible president, terrible, you know, in terms of what he did to the Jewish people, you see. And he was able to do this, and how many Jews died because they couldn't get to America, you see. So that was called a great bluff. The Satan was hoping that he would get the nations, all of them, against the Jews, each in his own nefarious plans. This is what the Satan was hoping. Now, how would that affect the Jews? Because the Jews would say, wait a minute, what's God doing to us? He has abandoned us. So therefore, we will abandon him. And they'll go back to sin, which means he will be able to nourish even more from the holiness of the Jew. That's really the strategy of the Satan. So he would be able to get firepower, right, which is the Kedusha of the Jews, based on that. You see, so that is called a great bluff. That's really in many ways what the essence of World War II was. But it didn't work, because Jews began to come back after the war. So therefore what Satan then did is he got the Erev Rav, which are Jews that want to give up Torah. They want to give up the spirituality of the Jewish people, and they want to become Israelis. We don't need religion, we have Israel. That is the Erev Rav, basically, right? But that's not only the Erev Rav, right? It's basically the Zionist, you see, to get all the Jews to dump Torah. But the whole essence of Judaism is the Torah. So he was able to get enormous amount of Jews, right, to sin, you see. So in that sense, he was able to break the resolve of Jews to remain religious. So we're talking here about who, right? We're talking here about the conservative movement, the reform movement, Reconstructionists, right? We're talking about the Zionists, right? We're talking about the Haskalah, the Maskilim. We're talking about all these movements that were against basically the Torah. So that's a second strategy. But again, it didn't really work, and so on. So therefore, there's only one strategy left, to try to get an ally. But the problem is there is no ally. The only one who could take from the Kedusha of the Jew, the firepower of the Jew, which is his Kedusha, when he does mitzvahs, the only one who can do that is a Satan. You see? So if he's running out of this stuff where he has to give it back to the Jews, right? So the question is, he's finished. The answer is no. Without getting too deeply into it, there's only one nation other than the Jewish people that can take the holiness from the divine presence. Who is that? The Arabs, or I should say more accurately, the Muslims. Why? Because Yishmael, who's the son of Avram Avinu, which I spoke about, and Yishmael, okay, what he wanted is he asked God, Lu Yishmael Yichyeh Lefanecha, because God said to him, you will have a son, Yitzchak. So Avram Avinu, for whatever reason, said, Alavai, my son Yishmael, right, should live before you. What that means, to be able to take your Kedusha directly from you and not have to get it through the Satan. It doesn't depend on the sins of the Jews. The Muslims can take the Kedusha of the Shekhinah because of mitzvahs that they do, Milah, and so on. They believe in one God. Directly from the Shekhinah, they don't need to have the Jews sin, which is very, very interesting. And God said to Avram Avinu, I have accepted your prayer. So therefore, what happens? So the Satan goes over to the Malach of Yishmael and says, listen, I need your Kedusha. I need the Kedusha that you're able to take down independently of the Jews. You see? So the Malach says, okay, this is obviously what happened. Malach said, okay, but here's the deal, right? There's always a quid pro quo, right? So what the Malach of Yishmael says, listen, until now, who is the West? Well, the West is basically Christianity, it's Western civilization. And they are the most powerful people on earth, right? You want my Kedusha? Then I want the Muslims, right? I want the Arabs, the Muslims, to be the greatest nation on earth. Not only that, but when I say greatest nation, not only in terms of themselves, right? But I want them to be also, besides the greatest nation, right? I want them to be able to take from the Kedusha of the Jewish people, you see, and as a result of that, I want them to take one of their own and be head of the United States. Lo and behold, out of nowhere, this guy Barack Obama comes out, and he's obviously a Muslim. I mean, that's why he had such deference to the king of Saudi Arabia and so on. And he's always been a Muslim and so on. All of a sudden, a guy, a first-year senator, I mean, it's incredible. What credentials did he have to his name? And he becomes president of the United States. I mean, this is Yishmael and Esau together now taking over the world, which when you think about it, is absolutely amazing, you see. And therefore, this is what happens, you see. So we now see that there's a new setup. It's no longer the West, Esau, taking from the Kedusha of the Jewish people. It is the West, Esau, and Yishmael taking from the Kedusha of Klal Yisrael. Because Esau now has access to the Kedusha of Yishmael. That means that what is now being ushered in is the Messianic era, or the beginning, you see. So Yishmael is now the head of Esau, which is incredible, right? And they, together with the Erev Rav, the Zionists and so on, are going to try now to do what? To destroy the Torah and the Jewish people, you see. But like I said, that ushers in a new era, you see. Not only that, what does Obama do, which is interesting, but you have to understand something. The gematria, the numerical value of Mashiach, is 358, which, by the way, is the same gematria as Nochosh, the snake. Why? Because the opposite of Mashiach is the Nochosh, is the snake, the primordial snake of Adam Harishon. You see, therefore, the opposite of Mashiach is the Nochosh, or whoever represents the Satan, you see. What is fascinating is the gematria of Barack Obama is 358. You see, that tells us that Obama is not a regular person. He is meant to be, okay, in opposition to the Messianic process. As something, we begin to realize that this guy, Obama, was incredibly arrogant, evil, and he hates the Jewish people, which is obvious. He even treated Netanyahu as a shmata, as a piece of rag. We remember the history, you know, and not only that, when he left the presidency, right, he joined with the Security Council, right, in the UN to condemn Israel for whatever it was. It was the first time in history that America actually was on the side of the evil part of the UN. And this was Obama. Stabbed him in the back, which is incredible. But Obama really hates the Jews. He certainly hates Netanyahu. But he's an incredibly arrogant person. And not only is it so, in many ways when you think about that, wait a minute, if we are looking at the end of time, where we now have Yishmael and Esau together, right, and that's how the Satan is surviving, right, then we are going to expect many things which are messianically driven to happen. Like I pointed out, right, that there will be a tremendous satanic arousal, right, against Trump, who's trying to help the Jews and assist them in having Eretz Israel. The second thing, right, he's going to try to do things that will be against the interests of the Jewish people. Now, the problem we know is that a president of the United States is only 4 years. But one of the things that happened, which was astounding, is Biden, right, who's basically an empty suit, he takes his orders from Obama. Obama is the one really behind the terrible amount of things going on in America. Therefore, what I would say is something very interesting. You see, that Obama is really the Nachash. He is in the service of the evil, which is in opposition to the Mashiach. And that's why his gematria is 358, which is fascinating. Not only that, he's the one that's supporting Iran. We know that. He's the one, through himself, he gave billions of dollars to Iran, which is the major enemy of Israel. How could you do that? You know what these guys are. These guys are not interested in peace. They say they want to wipe out Israel. They actually want to wipe out a great deal of the West. They want to take over and begin a caliphate. Yet Obama is aiding and abetting Iran and their proxies, because the proxies get their money from Iran. Well, how could he do that? Because this guy is a tremendously evil person. But what's interesting, right, is that not only is he for the UN and he hates Israel and so on, he's also sponsoring, aiding and abetting Iran, which is the last war. Therefore, it's very reasonable to assume that Obama is goig. Amazing, isn't it? That we finally have hit on the man who's the arch enemy of good, Obama. And we take a look at what he's done. He's destroying America. Why? Because Yishmael wants to be ahead of America. You see, and not only is he destroying America, he's doing a great job. He's the one advising Biden and the administration, right? He has an inordinate influence to destroy America. And not only that, at the same time as he's destroying America, he's giving Iran billions of dollars to destroy Israel and to take over the Middle East. I mean, this guy's doing everything possible, right, to ally himself, right, with Yishmael, to destroy the West and to aid and abet Yishmael. That's exactly what he's been doing. And even though his term ended in 4 years, no, he now has somebody carrying on his legacy, right, as Goig, right, and that is Biden. It's amazing when you look at it, but it certainly would seem that he is in charge. And remember one thing, Goig is a person that leads the 70 nations of the world against the Jewish people. Who is the 70 nations of the world? And the answer is the UN. And we know that Obama aids and abets, right? And Iran and so on. And there's so much destruction of the West and so on, you see. So therefore, I would say very simple, that Obama certainly qualifies to be Goig, you see. And it's not only that, he was the former president and the head of the United States, which in many ways has become Islamic. I mean, just take a look at the anti-Semitic demonstrations, all in favor of Hamas. And Hamas is a bunch of terrorists, right? We're talking here about America. We're talking here about the colleges, the elite institutions who aid and abet, who support morally, right, in every which way, Hamas. What is this? You see, we are looking at the destruction of the morals of Esau, right? And we are looking at the beginning of the American desire to overthrow Israel and so on. In many ways, America is allying itself with Iran and Hamas and the whole Islamic culture. Who's behind this? Well, this isn't Biden's idea. What does Biden know anyway? And so on, This is Obama's idea, and Biden is taking his cue from Obama. So I believe that Obama is really going, you see. And the more going is the UN, which he clearly has enormous amount of influence, and so on, and America, in a certain sense, is falling into the trap, you see. But in any case, and this is messianic, which is interesting, because he has given the wherewithal to Iran to invade Israel. If he hadn't given Iran that kind of money, they were collapsing. Under Trump, they were dying. All he had to continue was another, 6 months, a year, they would have collapsed. And that's the end of Iran. Instead, along comes Biden, right? And he gives them billions of dollars, removes all the sanctions. So now they're a wealthy country. They used to have only, I think, $4 billion in their reserves. And with Biden's help, they now have $70 billion. They are a very wealthy country, and they now have all the money to support their proxies. Well, is it Biden? No. Biden doesn't have the smarts for this. It's Obama that is telling Biden what to do, you see, because the head of all the progressives, basically, and one of the major heads of the Democratic Party is Obama. There you are, and so on. So this is another incredible dimension of what is happening today, that in a certain sense, Obama is actually initiating the beginning of a messianic era by bringing out the last battle of the Mashiach of Iran. And as the Chazal tell us, where God says, Higia Zman Gulaschem, the time of your arrival has arrived. It's very interesting. Now, what's also very interesting is the fiasco of the IDF. How they missed this is beyond understanding. I mean, if you read the report of the New York Times, or in general, people realize there's something wrong here. Because there are two failures. One was an intelligence failure, right? Okay. But that itself is incredible. You tell me the Mossad, the Shin Bet, the IDF all missed? No. They knew about this a year before, that this was going to happen, you see, So when people, so the first thing is, they knew about this. They didn't miss this. This wasn't an intelligence failure. They knew about this. And the amazing thing is, even when it was happening, there was not only was there not an information breach, but there was a security breach. How in the world did these have 3,000 terrorists, is what they say, that broke through a wall at 70 different places? Defense. How? It's impossible. What happened? And people were calling up the IDF and saying, we're being killed. They're coming, they're killing in all the kibbutzim and so on. We're being invaded. And the IDF just ignored it. In fact, they even told people, if you continue to do this, we're going to punish you, court-martial you, or whatever, What do you mean? How could you ignore and deny what your own people are telling you? And not only that, why did it take 6 hours to get from the center of Israel, right? How could they be so ill-prepared? None of this makes sense, you see. So that's going to lead to an incredible scandal, you see. That's what's going to happen. And I believe something else. Israel has no choice. The astounding thing, which I pointed out in the first year and so on, is that they absolutely ignore the threat that Iran poses. How could you allow Hamas to dig 300 miles of tunnels? Are they insane? For the sole purpose of hiding and try to destroy Israel. That's the first thing. Second thing, how can you allow Hezbollah to collect 150,000 sophisticated missiles, right? What are you insane? All pointed at Israel. And the third thing, how do you allow Iran to develop an atomic weapon? It's incredible. And Israel has done nothing under Netanyahu. Nothing. So the whole question is, what is this? The policy of Israel has basically been containment. You see? What containment? These are mortal enemies. These are enemies that want your extinction. That's what they want. There's no luxury here of containment. What is wrong with these people? Yet that's what happened. So I really believe that this is going to lead to an unbelievable scandal, huge scandal, and it's going to overthrow the government. And then I believe something which is very interesting. Mashiach ben Yosef, who I talked about and so on, right? You know, he's going to come. And what he does when he does come is he ends the Golus. That's number one. He ends the exile. That's number one. The second thing he does is the Beis Hamikdash is built in his time, not Mashiach ben David. In fact, the Gemara to Yerushalmi in Masechta Ma'aseh Sheni that proves that Beis Hamikdash will exist before Mashiach ben David, which is Mashiach ben Yosef. So that's the second thing. The third thing that Mashiach ben Yosef will do is restore the spirituality of the Jewish people, the Torah itself. You see? And then ultimately, then Mashiach ben David comes and he restores the Shekhinah itself. So you have these two individuals that will come and change Klal Yisrael. But will that happen? Who now is the enemy of the Jewish people in terms of their own Torah? And the answer is the Erev Rav, which I've talked about numerous amount of times, and so on. The Erev Rav. So Mashiach ben Yosef will war with the Erev Rav. But what is interesting is that it's not going to go from the Erev Rav to Mashiach ben Yosef. There basically has to be an intermediary. There is somebody that's going to take over the government and begin the process of dismantling the Erev Rav and restoring the Jewish people, especially in Eretz Yisrael, to their spiritual roots. Some individual, an intermediary, you see, who is not Erev Rav at all, who will be religious, right, and be a very educated, principled man, who will recognize the spiritual greatness of the Jewish people. Because in order to get rid of evil, you need to get rid of evil, number one, and there has to be a slow rehabilitation. See, that's the problem. It's not enough to get rid of the Erev Rav. What about all the Jews that are not religious, that are really gone? You see, they need to be rehabilitated before the Mashiach come, you see. So I believe there will be a rehabilitation process by some type of intermediary. And then you're going to have the entry of Mashiach ben Yosef, who will be around before, but he will not exercise his power, which I said was Tiferes Anois. You see? So it's really a two-step process. Somebody has to bring about, you see, the return of the Jewish people to spirituality, to the Jewish religion, and undo the terrible damage that the Erev Rav has done to the Jewish people. I mean, most people are not aware. There's I'll give you an example, there's 1.5 million kids in the Israeli public school system. 1.5 million children. And basically, they know nothing about Judaism because the schools deprive Jews of their own religious studies. I mean, it's Yadua. And whatever is taught is a smattering. Could you imagine the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu gave to the Jewish people? How many times does it say, and Moshe Rabbeinu warns the Jews, and you will observe the Torah? I mean, if Moshe Rabbeinu woke up today, he'd probably say, I'd rather go back to the grave. He wouldn't believe it. He has said so many times, and you will observe the commandments, right? And he watches 1.5 million kids that learn almost nothing about Judaism. We have no idea what the magnitude of the sin is that the Erev Rav is doing. And who's responsible for this? The Erev Rav. Where is Netanyahu? Where is the Israeli Educational Department? You see? How could this be? You're talking about the future of the Jewish people, the youth. They don't know anything. You see? And we're talking about 1.5 million kids. That is the future of the Jewish people. So we have no idea of the gravity, the seriousness of the sin of the Erev Rav. For that alone, you see. So somebody has to turn around all this, the educational system, the secular Jews in Israel, and there's so many of them before Mashiach ben Yosef, you see. I have a theory who this is. It's only a theory, I guess, I don't know this from any other place. But it obviously has to be an intermediary who is thoughtful, religious, right? And who is well known. And I'll tell you who I think it is. I may be wrong, but I think he'd be a great candidate. I think it's Jonathan Pollard, right? It doesn't sound like likely, and I think that he would be a great candidate to be an intermediary, to bring about a change, you see. Now you may say, wait a minute, how could you turn Israel around? You can't compel Jews, and that is true. You can't compel people to be religious. They don't want to be religious. It's over with and finished, you see. But the truth is, you don't have to compel them. This is a tremendous mistake. What does that mean? Because one of the problems of Israel, there are many kiruv organizations in Israel that do great work and so on. You have, they have the Osamech and Esau, Torah, Arachim. There are many great organizations. Their problem is they don't have any money. But what happens if you give them money, just like you give the colleges? Then they could use their programs, and they're very convincing, to help Jews, you see, return to Judaism without compulsion, just by the sheer brunt of the logic and the beauty of Judaism. Right? There are many ways. Once the Jewish people, or the leader who will be then there, puts his head to it, there are many incredible plans that he can do that will bring the Jews back to their religion. So I believe that's the next stage, right? The next stage is an intermediary that will deal with the Erev Rav. But the question is, well, how do you get Israel to vote for this guy? And I believe that the scandal of what the IDF did, how they ignored, because they ignored the reality of what was going on, that's why you have people dying left and right, the 1,200 people who died, right? They could have saved them. If the army would have responded in a half hour, how many Jews would have been saved? Incredible. This could be that thing which initiates an enormous scandal, gets rid of the Erev Rav, and puts in this intermediary, you see. And as a result of that, that will begin the reversal of the process without compulsion and without fear, you see, just by convincing logically of the beauty and the truth of Judaism. Then you can have Mashiach ben Yosef, which will do what? Which will take them from these people who have reversed the course, and then they can begin to learn and become spiritual, you see? So you have to have that intermediary concept and so on, you see. It has to proceed in a gentle way. You can't rush into this, you see. And I believe that it's going to occur in many ways very shortly, you see. And I am hoping that, certainly that we will be able to see it, you see. And we're watching many things that accompanies the Messianic process. Like I said, the Birur, you see, what has happened is very interesting. Because of the anti-Semitism of America, the colleges are now in disrepute. People look at Harvard, you call this Harvard University. The colleges have destroyed their reputation because they realize the immorality, or I should say the amorality of colleges. Are you crazy? You're going to tell me that you can have free speech of genocide of Jews, and it depends on the context, as long as they're not killing Jews? Are you out of your mind? This is what you're teaching the youth, you see? And besides, Trump is going to create a free university, which he said he will, and take away all the elitism of Harvard and University of Pennsylvania and Columbia, all the Ivy Leagues, and many of the hundreds of colleges that are destroying the youth. That's really what's happening. the colleges are destroying the youth because they're all progressive, they're left, they're radical, and they're destroying the youth. And these youth are the future of America. Whatever happened to America? Is there anybody in America who knows what's going on, who has seichel and so on and so forth? Any case, so we are now in the midst of all of this, which in many ways is incredible, you see, and this is happening in our time, and I believe, like I say, the last war is the war of Iran with the Jewish people, and there will be a war, because Israel has to remove Hezbollah, and they have to remove Iran, and that's going to happen, and it can happen any day, you see, because as long as they exist, you will always have the evil that is an incredible detriment to the freedom of not only Israel, but to the freedom of spirituality and the tremendous impact of evil. So, like I once said, the Zohar, that Tchias HaMesim takes 210 years before the end. And since the end is 2040, that's the English year, or the year 6000, that means according to the Zohar, Tchias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead, which happens right after Mashiach ben David, is going to happen by the year 2030, which is what? Less than 6 years from now, which is incredible. And that's one of the reasons why you see such an incredible acceleration of the process itself. So let's hope. And by the way, tonight is Rosh Chodesh Shvat, and the Zohar says that the redemption begins on Rosh Chodesh Shvat. It actually says that, because Teves is the month of Esau. That's why he's successful. That's why you have Christmas and so on, which is Esau, Satanic. And the mazel of Teves is Capricorn, the goat. And the goat is the sign of Esau. It's called the Shiur, you see. And it begins with Shvat, right? And Shvat begins the entry of Mashiach ben Yosef, in that sense, the Geula, which goes into Adar, which is Mashiach ben Adar is the Purim, which is Haman and Mashiach ben Yosef. Then, of course, in Nisan. And just before I end, I want to point out that something incredible is going to happen on April 8th. And that is a total eclipse of the sun that crosses America. And I think it's going to go over New Jersey or Pennsylvania. Anyway, it's going to go through New York, whatever. And that's on April 8th, which, by the way, is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Now, isn't that interesting? And a total solar eclipse is a tremendous sign of redemption, right? Against Esau, right? And it's tremendous for the Jewish people. And that's going to happen on Rosh Chodesh Nisan itself, which is the month of redemption, you see. So things are looking up, okay? And hopefully all this will come about. Thank you.